All right. Good morning. If you live on the West Coast, I'm Billy Bob. It's 9 a.m., 9:05. Oh, is it really 9:17? Is that how late we are? Dang. So we are late. It's 9:17 a.m. West Coast time. I've got co-host Ian Comer from a suburb in Moscow. It must be, I want to say, is it
7:17? Yes.
17. Dust James is in North Carolina. I remember the state within which he resides because it's on his hat there. So he is our special guest. I believe it must be right at like 12:17 p.m. over in North Carolina. Dust says he's about to hit a dead spot on the road, and so he might cut out for a little while, but he'll be back. So I guess we maybe can start off the discussion by bringing up the DNC.
Billy Bob, maybe we should tell him about Dust's presentation. It's not going to kick off right away, but we should tell him it's coming. What do you think?
Yeah, no, we can do that. So Dust James has prepared a bit of a presentation today to just talk about the hidden history of resistance to to domestic oppression, especially like labor oppression in the United States or racial oppression. So we did want to spend 20-30 minutes. Dust was gonna talk about that, so we're looking forward to that. But we did want to wait until after he crossed through this dead spot on the highway. So in the meantime, we were going to talk about other things, but I don't want to, force us into any particular discussion. Does anybody have anything they'd like to say first before we talk about?
We could talk about the DNC, and actually, if you want to bring up my Facebook page, I actually uploaded today. Should be one of my most recent posts. A great video from the outside the DNC convention. So
okay, you're asking me to do technical things, which I'm going to do. But I'm just not very good.
I would do it myself. Unfortunately, I don't have Facebook in this computer as of right now, and that's where I put the video. But basically, so there was that was, I would say, a sour spot in the DNC. I mean, the media was all playing along. Everybody was all putting on a good face. But the sour spot, of course, was Palestine, because there's a large faction that is pro-Palestine and are not happy with Biden's and Harris with their unconditional support for Israel. And I really didn't, actually, I'll be honest, social media was basically the only place I even saw it being discussed. Like because I look at CNN and NBC, I didn't really see anyone even acknowledging there was a protest outside the DNC. So if you found it, there's my dog. Yes, my dog. Keep scrolling. Keep scrolling. That's an AI image I thought was funny. I post a lot of stuff that's funny. But anyways, keep going. You should have found the video before you shared screen. Keep going. Oh my gosh.
I was thinking it was the first one.
I forgot how much time I wasted on Facebook today.
Is this it here?
Oh, here it is. Yeah, if you can make it full screen for us. There you go. Yeah, so this is... I don't hear sound for some reason. I'm not getting any sound from you. But you can see. Okay, I don't know why there's no
sound?
Hear it. No. I mean, but basically, if we're not going to, I don't want to waste a ton of time trying to do technical stuff, but you can play it. You can just play it. Oh my gosh. Which happened to it? Okay, just play it. Yeah, there's no sound. I'll just tell you what they're saying. So they're listing off the names of people in Gaza who were killed by the bomb. They're just listing them all off, and you can see, you don't even need sound. You can kind of see their facial expressions. Some of them, they're laughing. There's people covering their ears and laughing, like this woman here. It's funny. It's not even that they're embarrassed or ashamed. I've definitely felt ashamed and embarrassed and stuff before. That's not shame. They just think it's funny. It's and I can't think of a more stereotypical Democrat lib left reaction, like, just la 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 la,
Yeah, that's pretty awful. I know they were really trying to influence and pressure the DNC to include a Palestinian voice, and that was too much for the DNC to do. So they did not allow anybody of Palestinian, nationality to come on the stage and say anything. They don't want to upset the donor class. And then, I was watching the speech from Kamala. It's tough to get that right. So Kamala, at the very end of her speech, she touches on that issue and she gives lip service. She doesn't offend anybody. She gives lip service to Palestinians without offending, the Zionists. And for what you expected, for what she needed to do to make her base happy, the oligarchs. I think she did a pretty decent job, with her speech, but definitely, she waited till the very end to address Israel Palestine, and she threaded the needle, so to speak. She didn't take a side. She just said, we want a ceasefire. I'm like, oh, okay, you want a ceasefire, but you're still giving bombs to facilitate a genocide. So yeah, I mean, it's just really disgusting. But the optics were what she needed to not, to not really mess up and anger, her base, which is, wealthy Democrats and celebrities and people of the capitalist class that want, a more, better optics for imperialism, better optics. Not the optics that Trump would say, like, let's take their oil and, do what you got to do, Bibi Netanyahu, to those Palestinians. Just get it done quick. Those kinds of things, aren't good for the ruling class. And so the Democrats offer a better image. A female face, a black face.
Good morning,
you said some other things, Ian, that made me think of other things to say as well.
I'd say the big thing about what you said, well, Dust is back. Maybe he's out of the dead spots, but I was going to say what you said about ceasefire. I mean, it's the absurdity. I mean, there's multiple layers of absurdity to the Harris campaign. She's acting like a prospective candidate when she's actually the person in office now. There's not a single thing she's saying. And there was even a Politico. I mean, there's multiple media reports about that. People ask, what is your platform? What exactly are you going to do? And like Democrats, I mean, the openly stated DNC position is we want to, we need Kamala to win, and then we'll talk about what our policy is going to be, which is astonishing. It's like, it's like that famous, I don't even remember who said it. It was Hillary Clinton. Who said that? You have to, the Obamacare Act, we have to pass it to know what's in it, kind of thing. It's not even that. It's like, we're not even going to think about what our platform is until she's won. It's kind of, it kind of makes you ask, I'm sure they know what they want to do. I just think they don't want to say it until she's in office.
Yeah.
And there's a whole absurdity. I was going to say this. I'm sorry, I didn't even cut you off. I was going to say the absurdity of what you said about the ceasefire is like, well, they're giving the weapons. I mean, and when you look at, criminal law in the USA, or probably most other countries, if you provide a weapon or any kind of material aids to the commission of a crime, knowing what's going to be used for, if you give someone a gun or a knife or even a car, whatever it is, knowing that is going to be used for a crime, that makes you criminally liable, just as criminally liable as the person who did it, because you were aiding in the crime. So it's,
it's
absurd.
we're definitely complicit in genocide, and when I say we, I mean the United States government. And I don't consider it a democracy. I don't think it really is following the will of the people. So I shouldn't say we are responsible. And but definitely, I mean, totally complicit. I mean, the genocide couldn't happen without these weapons. And so, yeah, I mean, the liberals that support Kamala Harris walking, into the DNC, and people are trying to say, hey, how can you support this? We got to stop this genocide. And they're all just, plugging their ears, la, la, la. So Malcolm Nance, I posted a Facebook post about one of his tweets. So I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with Malcolm Nance.
I'm
But
not.
he's a he's a vote blue no matter who.
I'm through the
guy
dead
that's
spot.
Okay,
I don't know.
good. Yeah, let me.
I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead and finish. I would like to respond briefly as well to the
Yeah,
DNC
let me
conversation.
wrap up, and then I'll throw it to you. But so Malcolm Nance, he's like a security expert, and he's on MSNBC. Often, but vote blue no matter who. He was one of the first people in Ukraine. So he was in Kiev, all dressed up in fatigues. He joined the whatever legion that is, the foreign legion that's supporting Ukraine.
Oh, the international or whatever
Yeah,
the
and
hell
he's
they're
just
calling themselves.
a rank propagandist, right? But this gets us kind of back to our show yesterday, talking about identity politics, because he tweeted this post, and I shared it on my Facebook stream, and it was basically that he showed an empty chair, and he said black people know how to use this chair, and he wasn't going to take kindly to protesters that were going to disrespect Kamala Harris, and he was gonna he was really pushing this identity politics. He was pushing, black people aren't going to tolerate, you're going to drive a wedge between black people and Palestinian people. And that's really what he was trying to do. He was trying to drive a wedge between pro-Palestine and the black community, because the black community wants Harris, is happy with Harris, and they're not happy with Palestinians, protesting her or criticizing her. It was going to be a problem with the black community. And so this is how, and this is why they want Kamala, because it's divisive, and it's gonna eliminate a whole bunch of criticism about policies of empire. And that's why she's so good for them. And then right there, Malcolm Nance is just driving it home, driving that wedge between.
I don't understand the joke about the empty chair. What do you mean? Is that like a Clint Eastwood arguing with an empty chair? Like
no. He was gonna, black people know how to use chairs as a weapon, so they're gonna grab the chairs.
That's a reference to the race fight down in the South
on the pier, right? Yeah,
there were people that rightfully defended the worker with a chair, so they are manipulating a flashpoint in resistance in the U.S. With that statement.
I don't know if that's kind of a rate negative. It sounds like kind of a. I mean, I get.
I mean, people spontaneously defended a worker who was under attack.
Right. I mean, I understand the reference. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just like, to use that as like, it's like black people are violent kind of thing. It's kind of,
it's definitely him
crazy.
looking down. Definitely him looking down on people, not other full aspect. I don't know. I would say, as far as the DNC, I would state first that Kamala Harris is a wolf in sheep's clothing. She is of the empire. She's a tool of empire through and through. Her record shows that she was basically there to enforce Joe Biden's mass incarceration policy. She kept poor and predominantly black men in prison after the time they were supposed to be released for slave labor. This is who she is. She's estranged from her own father, who is a Marxian economist, who gave some progressive advice to the Jamaican government as far as developing policies that were beneficial. and she went on national television and said, and was asked about her record of imprisoning black people for nonviolent crimes, and said, um, have you ever smoked marijuana? She said, yes. I'm Jamaican. Think of my heritage. And her father, in disgust, said, why are you demeaning our proud Jamaican heritage and me as an intelligent black Jamaican man for political points to defend the disgusting things you have done? This is who we're talking about. And she's pro-Zionism. She backs the fascist. But I think the reason why identity politics works is because racial oppression is real. Think about being a black woman in the South, or in an oppressed neighborhood in the North, where you're held to a higher standard. You are seen as less intelligent. You're not given a voice. The second you come to angry, you're given the stereotype of an angry black woman, and this is a beautiful, intelligent, powerful woman who is identified, presented, and seen as black. And you can see why people who haven't read about the resistance in their own culture, if you look at Kwame Ture, who stood in militant solidarity with the Palestinians. If there's so many examples of black solidarity with Palestine, the most militant leaders within the black community were in fully support of Palestine. If you haven't read that history, you've been robbed of your own history of resistance, and you're constantly facing sexism and racism in your own life. And you see someone that you can identify that also faces that, you're going to want to almost live vicariously through that and defend that person, no matter what. So the only reason why this works is because racism is so prevalent in our society. And I thought it was a very beautiful sheep's garment. The idea of someone coming from immigrants with a black father who overcomes sexism and racism herself and stood up for a good cause. Most of this is lies. She's straight up a pawn for the empire, but you can understand why this manipulation works for somebody who hasn't studied Marxism, geopolitics, or their own history of resistance. Like, you can understand why this works. And I think the last thing we want to do is echo the sexism and the racism against Kamala Harris. We don't want to call her a bimbo. We don't want to say she's a DEI hire like other people have done. We want to say we understand that you maybe feel empowered, that you're against the racism that she has gone through, but make it clear she is a wolf in sheep's clothing who serves the empire and does not serve the interest of the black community or the working class in the United States.
Now, the question is the wolf, the comparison to a wolf, of course, I think everybody knows that comparison, wolf in sheep's clothing. My question is she even pretending to be a sheep? Because, I look at the DNC now. I mean, I remember during the Obama, I think it was Obama's first election, actually, when Republicans were crying because they didn't have any American flags at the DNC. You're not patriotic, you hate America, you're a Muslim, blah, 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 blah. I didn't see that in this DNC. I mean, I saw it seemed like a very upfront authoritarian, we're going to reestablish America's supremacy over the world, both domestically and foreign policy. We're going to stick it to China and Russia. We're going to get rid of the extremists in America. I didn't see any, I understand what you meant, but I just didn't see the wishy-washy, we're I don't even know what we're progress. There's the progressive trappings, but I didn't see any masking of authoritarianism this time around.
Yeah, I definitely caught some of the very more jingoist, the saying of America, the greatest country in the world, that we have to be China. I saw some of the jingoism, but I mean, it's in comparison to the other side, the acceptance of immigrants, the need to overcome racism, the need to overcome sexism, that integration on the school, but like there's a bunch of things that would appeal to various communities in a positive way done in the speech, in the presentation.
So I'm not sure I want to agree in your suggestion, your advice that we limit our criticism and we don't talk about how Kamala, Kamala, did, work her way through the system in a large part by, dating married men that, got her these positions of importance. So like, I'm not sure why we can't tell the truth about that.
I don't think that's how she rose up within the system. There's plenty of women who want to get ahead, who sleep around, but aren't elevated. I think it's ultimately her effectiveness at being a good tool for empire. She was very good at that. And that's why she rose to prominence. I think that's primarily why she did. And not only do I not think that's correct, but it's also not the primary reason why we're opposed to her. We're opposed to Kamala Harris because she is an effective tool for imperialism against the working class and oppressed here in the United States. I think we should focus on that.
Well, I mean,
we have some comments, Billy Bob. Do you want to show any?
Yeah,
of these?
Sure. Okay, so well, what do you think, Ian? I mean, it's tough. Like, I mean, I don't want, so again, I'm hearing different things from Dust. So one is, that's not the primary reason that she is who she is, and that shouldn't be our primary concern, focus of criticism. And of course, I'm not saying our primary focus of criticism ought to be this. I'm just questioning, because before you were saying you should not criticize her about these things. And that's what I'm a little bit pushing back on. It's like, well, if there's truth, like, why can't we tell the truth? But no, I would agree that it's not the primary thing. And you might be right. It might not be why, but these are all different things. And so, I'm okay with the last two things you said. I kind of resist a little bit. The first thing you said, that we shouldn't be, criticizing her on that axis. But so
people are just going to jump in the fence because a lot of people make up lies. That is a constant trope, that they make fun of working class women and oppressed women constantly. That's the only way they got their position. Whether it's true or not, it's not something we want to be harping on. I mean, I honestly don't think it's true. I honestly think she was a very effective, intelligent tool of the imperialist and very ruthless in locking up and keeping oppressed communities oppressed.
Right, but I think and actually I think one of these comments actually says that is that she's not from an oppressed background. She's from an affluent. I mean, she definitely did not lift herself up by her bootstraps.
She's not from where Donald Trump's at, and she is from, regardless of if her family had money, she is from an immigrant family and from a black family. And a single parent family. So she's definitely had her social hardships, which she manipulated to the fullest extent to say she is an evil, lying imperialist, which she is.
Okay, so I mean, I think anybody can go to her Wikipedia page and see her bio. And I mean, there is a history of, getting advancement through, dating the mayor of San Francisco, who was twice her age and married. But we that's just a fact that maybe has no relevance. And so I obviously women are capable, and women can excel in a variety of capacities, and so I would never suggest otherwise. But I think it's fair to say that,
I can agree with the point. I can agree with the point that shouldn't be, the focal point. I mean, can, I'm sure you look at any famous person, you can probably find some queasy nepotism or whatever, some bodies buried in the bed. It shouldn't necessarily be the focal point. Yeah. So I'm in general agreement.
Now, the other thing was the DEI hire, Am I dropping out?
Yes.
No, I can hear you.
Okay. You're good now. You're okay.
So the DEI hire aspect, like, I mean, personally, it's obvious that if she wasn't a black woman, she would not be there. And
I disagree with that. I think I think she had to work harder to get where she was at, and do more to get where she's at because she was black.
In California,
And they're only using her blackness and to further support the system. Still,
But
black
if
people
she was a
are
white man, they wouldn't have
underrepresented.
selected her, though, right? If she was a white
I
man,
mean,
she
if
would
there
have
was,
never been
there's plenty of
chosen
white
president.
men who have proven themselves by being ruthless tools of the system that are in office, just as she has. There's plenty of white men in power who have demonstrated
Right.
themselves to be.
But they didn't
complete
want
tools
any of
the
those
system.
white men. They wanted a black woman,
And
and so
black women are still underrepresented, even in California, and especially within the federal level of the United States.
Okay, sure, but she's been vice president for 4 years. We've seen how they had to squirrel her away. I mean, especially in that first year, we saw how even the
I think they
liberal
want.
press.
I think the ruling class wants her because the reason they wanted Obama, which is partly because she's able to put a black face on imperialism, but she's very effective and capable of doing it, and she's very effective and capable of being a ruthless imperialist while doing it. And she's worked very hard to be a ruthless imperialist.
The root cause of the complaints, I think, is what needs to be addressed, though, because if the accusation is true, and I think after 4 years there is some grounds for it being true, if she's not a terribly competent person who can manage her own household, and by the household I mean the White House, that's if she's not in charge, then that raises the question of who is. And that's the problem we had with Biden as well, because Biden's a vegetable. So it's like, who exactly is pulling the strings in the White House?
Sometimes incompetence is what they desire.
Yes.
Within one of their tools and positions.
So saying she's...
So race has nothing to do with it, even if that point is true.
Okay, sure. But saying she's not competent raises an important point.
Well, incompetent for what? I think she's shown herself very competent at being a political actor that's able to do the ruthless bidding of the system to keep people down. She's shown a lot of capacity for that.
Do you think nobody else has those skills? Like, there's nobody else.
Sure, there's plenty. There's probably a lot of black women who refused out of conscience to do that, and were passed up for promotion because they wouldn't be tools for the system.
But so I mean, I think there's a lot of
quantifiable accomplishments. I mean, what quantified? I mean, because I remember she was the border czar, and now they're saying she's not. No, that's fake news. She's not the border czar. So it's like, well, what did she do the past 4 years?
She was able to keep hundreds of black men in prison after their parole dates and use them as slave labor and get that accomplished within California. But I'm just saying the vice president is largely a figurehead to begin with. And she also went down to Latin America and told them, and bold straight told them, do not come. That's on the level of competency with Trump almost. As far as
I mean, so I'm gonna say that I think it's fair to criticize her over competence issues and also being there simply because she happens to be a black woman. Now she's a black woman that can hopefully from the perspective of the ruling establishment do an effective job, which is basically be a figurehead and allow people behind her to call to determine the policies and just being the face of empire. But I think it's legitimate to question her competency, to question her background. So I mean, we can agree to disagree, but I did want to allow you to go into. You had some thoughts about the history and the struggle against racism.
So there's been I miss Carlo and I forgot the other, and Greg haven't been on the show as much as I would have liked. I think they're key parts of the show, and I've had some concerns with the channel um, platforming anti-trans bigotry, anti-LGBT bigotry, and other things, as well as promoting unscrupulous organizations that hold horrible positions and largely grift. And I raised these concerns with Billy Bob, and he's like, "Well, why don't you come on the show and say what needs to be said and talk about it?" And I was like, "Okay, I'll do it." He actually wanted me to bring someone else on, but it's difficult after what's happened here to bring someone on that'd be willing to talk with this. But I'm a trucker in the South, and I'm rather thin-skinned. I don't, I talk with people all the time of various perspectives, so it doesn't bother me that much. But what I wanted to focus on is the history of resistance in the United States that we can build on, and why I hold the positions I do, and why I bring the criticisms that I bring. And there was a big discussion on the legitimacy of using U.S. history of resistance to tyranny, whether it be anti-colonialism, anti-racism, pro-labor, anti-capitalist exploitation, anti-monopoly. And a big controversial that's been happening is the American Revolution itself. And there seems to be two camps around this issue. One of them from people like Caleb Maupin, the ACP, Midwestern Marx, and that is that there's a lot we can build on the American Revolution. And they correctly point out that figures like Fidel Castro, Ho Chi Minh, Lenin himself, Marx, all supported the United States as an anti-colonial revolution that inspired the world, that inspired Latin America, that inspired Africa, that inspired that helped inspire the French Revolution to overthrow the monarchs. And I think that is true. I largely agree with that position. The other part of the position comes from a thesis from brother Gerald Horne, who wrote a book called The Counter-Revolution of 1776. And in this, he states that the United States revolution was an overall negative revolution that was primarily for the purpose of expanding the empire westward and maintaining slavery. And I think he offers some positive insight, even if I don't fully agree with his conclusion, or if I think it lacks nuance. And what I think both sides offer, I think revolutionary optimism is a must. I think we have to build on the history of resistance that has been hidden from us and exists here. Like, we don't have any other option. We were just going to throw out the entire population of the United States and not build on anything. That's absurd. We have to build on what's here. We have to build on what good has been. We have to build on the best of what is here. But I needlessly wrote off Dr. Horne after getting into this online discussion and being criticized by unprincipled figures myself. I made a post just basically canceling and writing off Dr. Horne and all his work. And I was wrong to do that. And I apologized for doing that. And I think what Dr. Horne brings is the real danger and the real history of the United States developing into the core of empire, and the racism that required, and the use of the white population against oppressed peoples, and the real instances of what happened, and the continued danger of that continuing to happen. I think Dr. Horne is right on that. I think Dr. Horne has done a lot of good historical work and insights that really haven't been done in academia. And I applaud him, and I see him as a comrade and a brother. And he's really good on Russia. He's really good on China. He's really good on geopolitics generally. Um, but what I think I would offer and reply, well, I think the conversation itself is a bit campus. There's a lot of emotion, and it comes down: do you support George Washington or not? Comes down to the phrase. And my position is some of an amateur historian myself. Before I decided to drive trucks, I wanted to be a history teacher. And the reason why I didn't decided not to not to teach history, is because I was already in quite a bit of student debt, and I had to go through the hardest classes with with family ties and coming from working class community. And then I read the North Carolina curriculum, and I was like, I can't morally teach this in schools. What is this? This is whitewashing of history in its entirety. I cannot teach this. So I decided to go into a trade instead of teaching history. But I can go over some of my specific interests that pertain to this issue. So to get back to the debate, a lot of the debate was, do you support George Washington or not? And one side was like, oh, he led the anti-colonial revolution, which is true. Also, oh, he was a slaver, he was a banker, he was a disgusting person. And all of these things are true simultaneously, if you want to look at the dialectic. But if we want to build on the history of resistance, there was historical figures who were much better than George Washington in the United States. And I think one in particularly to North Carolina would be the regulator movement. The regulator movement was a band of poor farmers who were upset with colonial governance and wanted to regulate the government because their laws were outright hypocritical. They would enforce laws against the poor farmers, but the wealthy farmers and banking establishment could break the rules at will under the colonial government. And the regulators, who were inspired by part of the very progressive Protestant traditions, like the Quakers in the United States. A figure in particular called, I think it's Herbert Husband, if I'm getting it incorrect. I don't have my notes, I'm driving. Who was influenced by the Quakers and actually was a pacifist, ran for the legislature, stuck up for the poor farmers against the corrupt colonial establishment in North Carolina. It lived in Siler City, the town I just passed through. And he went in jail, and the group called the Regulators broke him out of jail. And Herbert Husband and the Regulators and a lot of the progressive, there's a huge tradition of progressive Protestants and Christians in the United States that span throughout both the colonial history into the Civil War and onward. And we're not taught about any of this history in school. But so Herbert Husband really went on to be some of that mass proletarian base. Or there wasn't even a proletariat. It was the most exploited classes, the most exploited American, what would become Americans, the colonial subjects, were organized and pushed George Washington and his rich banker ass to fight against the colonialists. And later on, Herbert Husband was forced up into the hills, and he actually was imprisoned later on in life, fighting against George Washington in the Whiskey Rebellions. And people don't talk about the Whiskey Rebellions. The Whiskey Rebellions were more poor farmers who were pushed up in the hills, who maintained their ability to support themselves by growing corn and then distilling it into corn liquor. And there was taxes underneath the newly formed American government that benefited the large distilleries over the small distilleries. And there was a rebellion over this because it would have pushed the smaller corn producers and the smaller distilleries into starvation. And there was a rebellion against George Washington. So if you would say, do you support George Washington or not? Well, some of my heroes also fought against George Washington, even if he was pivotal in the anti-colonial struggle against Britain. He certainly oppressed workers, farmers, slaves, and indigenous people within the United States. And this is a common point throughout the history. If we look at Daniel Shea and Shea's Rebellion as another example of farmers who pushed against because these were some of the poorest people, the most exploited people within the colonial society, other than slaves and indigenous people, some of the most exploited white people within the colonial society, pushed against colonial corruption. They pushed for the American Revolution. They fought and died in the American Revolution under George Washington. And then when George Washington came to power, George Washington was used to brutally suppress Daniel Shays and a lot of the farmers' rebellions. So when I look at this, well, first of all, I think a lot of the points were correct. If you look at a lot of enslaved people, black people in the United States, they did not see a difference between conditions either under a colonial government or an American government, and rightfully so. And some of them are actually ended up fighting for the British, and the same thing with certain indigenous people. If you look at the French Indian Wars, but if you look at the poorest section of white people in the United States, they helped. It was in their interest, class interest, to fight for the anti-colonial revolution, and they were on the front lines of it. And then they were further suppressed by figures like George Washington. So I think those are some of the bit of resistance. I think we not only look at George Washington, but all of the people that fought against George Washington that represented the various interests in the United States. I think that's the first aspect. Any response to that before I continue on?
You're muted, Ian. You're muted.
I said, go, Billy Bob. Go ahead. Looks like you're
okay. Well, no, I mean, I just think that Dust is making the point that history is complicated and multifaceted, and we can't have real superficial views on things because of the complexity of historic reality. So I'm reminded of Napoleon, right, who could be seen as a progressive, right? Napoleon was seen as a progressive at the time because he was fighting against monarchies, and all the monarchies ended up joining forces to defeat him. But he definitely wasn't a communist or socialist, but yet he could still be seen as progressive in certain ways. And so, no, I agree with Dust's, explanation of these things and showing the multifacetedness of people like George Washington. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to take our norms and values of 2024 and go back several hundred years in history and then condemn people for not having the same values. On the other hand, you'd think that fucking slavery is just wrong. Like, you have slaves, you ought to just realize it's wrong. But again, it was a different world, and so doesn't make a lot of sense to really do that. But and then Gerald Horne has, I know he got into an argument with Tony Montero, and they had different points of view on the revolution. And so Horne definitely focuses on the negatives of it and how it did, free up racism, because Britain, I think, had abolished slavery, or they were going to soon. And whereas once the United States became its own country, they were able to continue slavery for a long time after otherwise would have been abolished by the British. So those are all true things, and I think we just have to have a nuanced, thoughtful approach that isn't that takes into consideration all the different perspectives. And if we do that, I think we can still do that and then be comrades, as opposed to getting into camps and saying the other camps, fascists or whatever. Lastly, Dust, I am going to disagree that we have platformed anti-trans bigotry. I am going to reject that. I'm also going to reject that we're allowing, groups on here that are, I forget the language you use, grifters, whatever. We're just gonna disagree on that, but I get it. You have your opinion, but it's definitely entirely different from my own. But no, and look, I appreciate you coming on, having a thin skin, and talking to us, especially if you see us in those terms that you described us in, because I wouldn't agree with those terms, but I do appreciate you're still having a willingness to talk to us, if if that's how you see us. But
I would say Russia is going through a similar conversation right now as Americans, because and Russians themselves will say this, that cancel culture is a problem. There's this, they do unfortunately have this pattern where they'll get excited, they'll find some new ideology, get very excited about it, and not only say this is the good and proper ideology, they will say, well, if you believe in the old ideology, you're a terrible person, you're canceled, you're the worst person ever. So they did that, unfortunately, in their own communist revolution. They said, if you liked the Russian Empire, if you liked it, you're a terrible person, you're canceled, right? And then in the 1990s, after the end of the Soviet period, it's the same thing. If you liked the Soviet system, you're a terrible person. And now they're again going through that now, with this whole, traditional values and, Euro Asian, whatever the hell Dugan calls it. I'm not a huge fan of him. They're telling the people who liked embracing liberal Western values, well, if you liked those Western liberal values, you're a terrible person too. So that's a dialogue they have to go through. So I would say the lesson for both them and us is, rather than trying to cancel each other, and of course there are ideas that are horrible enough that they should absolutely be canceled, but in general, I think the word of the day should be reconciliation. We need to take these different periods of our history, these different figures in our history, in the slavery area and the anti-communist pushback in the late 19th, early 20th century, in the Jim Crow era, in the civil rights movement, in the war on terror. We need to take these different groups of people and these historical figures, both big and small, and reconcile them as best we can. So that's my main takeaway from this debate. And so that's why, there have definitely been I'd say controversial people and groups on this show. Even when we talked to Slava in the last couple of shows, I even said that I was not convinced, but at the same time, I think it's good to hear these viewpoints, even ones which I don't agree with. So that's my 2 cents so far.
Okay, I'd like to get into the a period that's specifically close to my family. One of my direct ancestors was a prominent figure within the Great Awakening, Ashel Nettleton, and he supposedly saved 30,000 souls, predominantly within Appalachia and the Badlands, as the U.S. was moving westward at the times. And my understanding is there's contradictions within the Great Awakening. The Great Awakening is both a counter-revolution and the basis of it's more of a theological counter-revolution, but it's simultaneously the basis for the growing of the abolitionist movement at the same time. And a lot of people don't know this, but the founding fathers were not religious fundamentalists. I know if you look out today, You look at who's holding up the founding fathers as their heroes. We got to go back to only if we do the Constitution. These are the same people that say every word in the Bible is correct. All Muslims are going to hell. These are similar. These are usually similar camps. But people don't know is that the founding fathers' religious theological views were extremely revolutionary, even liberal in the classic sense. There's actually a Jeffersonian Bible where he did not want Christianity to be superstitious, and he edited the Bible to take out all occurrences of miracles. The founding fathers were largely Universalists, Christians who saw the Bible as fables, who saw it as basic general principles that could be applied. They were almost the exact theological opposite of the fundamentalists. And then the period of the Second Great Awakening. The first one was the revival before the American Revolution. The second was what some Marxists would consider the Second American Revolution, depending on what side of the revolutionary spectrum politically you're on. And it was kind of a counter-revolution theologically against those very liberal and very radical theological ideas. The Second Great Awakening was largely a return to the church as a major body with power within people's lives, and a reawakening of Christianity and Christian principles generally. But it just so happens one of those Christian principles was abolition. Ending slavery, and the growth of the church in the North through a number of ways really did build the abolitionist movement. My ancestor in particular, I think he was more on the conservative end, but the fact that he was able to go out, build community, build these churches that are still there, did hold some of these progressive policies, was positive. And this isn't the only occurrence of this. We can look at Midwestern Marx actually did some good work. I don't know why they stopped it, talking about the history of the Quakers and the Shakers and the utopian Christian socialists who did stuff like the New Harmony Project. There was a lot of progressive socialist, anti-slavery history. If we look at economists, distinctly American communists like Henry George, who is a politician, who wanted to essentially claim all land and rent it to people, and then use that money to give a universal basic income at the point. This is way back. Who had some problems. He was in with the labor movement, but he had some issues with Marxists who didn't really like his more free trade ideas. But the fact that it was such a progressive person that's so prominent in American politics really shows you the lie that the United States has always been, the capitalist center of the world, has never done anything for progress. It has. And I think the Shakers are interesting. I think my next topic, I'm going to speak more on national oppression. But the Shakers are interesting. This is probably the only time a white person came up, credited music to black people that they might have not actually made. It's usually the opposite. There was a story of a Shaker who came up with this song, who says a Negro spirit came in the middle of the night and taught him this song. Like there was, and I think that comes out of a feeling of being part of a immoral society that's based on slavery and wanting to overcome that. And you see it done in a variety of ways, not even the most healthy ways, but there has been this. And I can't, and then you go on to the Civil War and you look at figures like Henry David Thoreau, who wasn't a communist, but was quoted by probably one of the pioneers of the Black Power movement, Robert F. Williams, who wrote Negroes with Guns, which I want to talk on as well, who was largely a pacifist but defended John Brown's actions. And we talk about John Brown was, you're looking for a white person in America who fought for justice and truth. There's no better example of that than John Brown. I think we should continue to build on our legacy, our pro-socialist experiments, our anti-racism, our anti-slavery, anti-colonial. But when you're doing that, it's important not to downplay the real instances of national oppression that still exist, the real racism and sexism that exist within the masses, and the real role the American masses have played in maintaining those institutions and continue in maintaining those institutions.
So I don't mind interrupting you for a second and talking about racism, because I'm not sure I'm going to get Ian's buy-in on this. But no, I absolutely agree that institutionalized racism still exists, and it is a problem. I think things are improving, like they're going in the right direction, but I think they're really, really bad. And I think the biggest, most obvious indicator of just how bad they are is when you compare median household wealth by race. So I know the numbers. I'm gonna do a quick quiz to see who can guess. Who can guess the difference between median Black household wealth and median white household wealth? So median, of course, means half the families have more than this, half the families have less. It's better than an average. Average is skewed by top-heavy numbers. But Ian, what do you think is the difference between the median net worth of a white household and the median net worth of a Black household?
I remember seeing this, and unfortunately, I don't remember the number. I remember it was large, though. It was probably over 50,000. So that's a spit in the wind guess, but it was large.
Yeah, the difference. Well, the difference is huge. So, I mean, the study I'm referencing in my brain, and there's been newer studies that still are pretty close to the same. So it was pre-Great Recession and post-Great Recession. And the point of it was to show that the Great Recession under Obama hit Hispanics and Black people worse. So it was pretty bad. There was a pretty big gap before the Great Recession. But then after the Great Recession, white families were had about 20 times more wealth, in dollar numbers than the median Black household. So it was something like 120,000 for the median white household, and it was like 12,000 or 6,000 or 8,000. It was 20 times. So whatever 20 times is, but I don't remember the exact numbers, but I know that it was 20 times more. So how does this happen, right? Like, are Black people just inferior? Are they lazy and prone to criminality? Is that to explain these discrepancies in household wealth? No, it's because the history of slavery, the history of racism, disenfranchisement, and the current reality where they are still suffering from not just the historic racism, systemic racism, but contemporary racism. For instance, segregation. Segregation is worse now than it used to be if you look at how segregated our neighborhoods are. But anyway, so I really think racism is an issue. It's a problem, and I think it's definitely illustrated when you look at household wealth based on your race. And there's all kinds of conservative talking points that try and argue against that. Well, what about Nigerians? They're doing pretty good. Well, what about Indians? Well, what about Asians? And they bring up these comparisons, which are not really relevant, right? I mean, the people that come over from Asia typically, we don't allow them to empty out the slums and bring their beggars over here. It's the brain drain. We're getting, people who are already successful, already educated, and that already have jobs lined up when they get here. Those are the people. So to try to compare those to African Americans who are ancestors of slaves isn't really fair. But anyway, I'm sorry for dragging us down that road. But those were my thoughts. When we talk about racism, it's an absolute problem. And I think that, it's illustrated by these facts about racial wealth inequality.
I actually don't disagree with you about institutional racism, and actually, I saw that study years ago. Unfortunately, or a study like that one years ago. Unfortunately, I don't remember the breakdown, but just guessing, I bet a lot of it can be explained by property, because if you own, your own home, that's of course adds to your net value. And I would suspect a much larger proportion of the African American population are renters rather than owners. So
and there's reasons for that, right?
Yes. So I think by making, so what I would disagree with is, I would disagree actually with both sides. I know that sounds ridiculous. I hate even saying it, but Republicans saying, we need a colorblind, it's not an issue. I also agree with the Democrats who want, the trappings of we're fighting racism, but ultimately you can defeat a lot of those problems by addressing the root cause, which in this case, not saying it's the only cause, but solving the housing problem in America would eliminate a lot of that. That's disproportionately impacting African Americans and other minority groups. So, but I agree with you about.
I think there's three more points I want to touch on. I want to go over. I know I've said a little bit. It's hard to get all this in on such a short show, especially me being late. But I want to go into detail on the historic nature of the national question, which is the way I view it, which is different from the revisionist view that is held by Midwestern Marx and others. And I could go into the history of that. The other thing I want to talk about is the labor movement. And I also want to talk about LGBTQ plus rights and how this proclaims and how we're supposed to work those in and use that to benefit labor instead of divide labor. I think I'll start with national oppression. So the difference between the revisionist and the anti-revisionist line on the national question is the anti-revisionists believe national oppression still exists in the United States. The civil rights movement did not end national oppression. The civil rights movement got rid of open racial segregation, open legal racial discrimination, but an anti-revisionist would argue that neo-colonial structures, specifically people like Kamala Harris, black faces on colonial government, keeping internally national oppressed people down. And actually, Billy Bob's statistic about during the Obama oppression recession, black people continue to go down. Now, if you were just going based off of the property issue, or if you were just going on something like that, determinist, it wouldn't show national oppression, which is often described as systemic racism. It doesn't fully explain it. And the revisionist position is, racism still exists, but we're all one people now. And we're all Americans, and the worst part of racism is over, and people are the least racist they've ever been, and we all just need to come together and build socialism. And an anti-revisionist say, no, you are, first of all, you're downplaying the importance of national oppression in our current society, and you're denying right to self-determination of oppressed peoples. Because Lenin said, even if a people is nationally oppressed, even if the ability for succession is 1 in 1,000, it is the duty of all good, he would say, social democrats, which was the word for socialist, back then specifically, needs to uphold that right to self-determination. And if they don't, that person should be held as an imperialist and should be held as a scoundrel. And I believe it's out of political expediency. Because if you look at the revisionist narrative, which is a very weak narrative, which happened right around the 1950s, 1940s and 50s, pre-Browderism. They kicked out the great Harry Haywood. Harry Haywood studied under Stalin in the Soviet Union. Harry Haywood came back to the United States and applied Stalin's question, the national question, to the Black Belt South and determined it to be an oppressed nation that deserves self-determination, and most importantly, that the specific things that affect the black proletariat at the time were were lynching and labor discrimination should be at the forefront of the entire proletarian movement. And if you look at the greatest success of the Communist Party USA, it was when they held the national question, when they held that. It was out of a point of weakness when they started facing McCarthyism that they dropped that position. And when they dropped that position, they stopped all proletarian organizing in the South. If you look at the book Hammer and Hoe, where it talked about organizing black proletarian black workers in the South in unity with poor whites. I didn't get to mention this earlier, but in North Carolina specifically, soon after the Civil War, North Carolina is an interesting state because North Carolina has some of the highest concentration of poor whites in the Black Belt South. And because of this, there was actually a fusion party soon after the Civil War that united poor whites with recently freed slaves in fusion parties that kicked the slave-owning Democrats out of power, and took power. And there was actually a coup d'etat. The Klan got together with the Democratic Party and kicked the fusion, poor whites and former slaves united, out of office in North Carolina specifically. But if you look at the history of the Black Belt, I would say it is an oppressed nation. They should be respected. And not only should it be respected, if we want to be true communists, we need to put issues like police brutality, wealth inequality, racial discrimination, racism and criminalization. These are all things that need to be at the forefront of the entire agenda, and not because they sound good or because if you look at the United States proletariat, if you look at the proletarian elements in the United States, so the Communist Party was successful at organizing blacks and white together, and in the 50s they were put down. At the same time that happened in the 50s was the development, starting with Roosevelt, FDR, the development of a largely white labor aristocracy. And a lot of black people, indigenous and Chicano people, were excluded from a lot of the FDR's New Deal things that built the middle class, because they allowed the racist states to determine who was going to get the benefits for these federal programs. So a lot of black, brown, indigenous people were left out of those programs, and there was kind of this white middle class that developed in the height of U.S. empire, and they have been anti-communist. And if we look into the 1960s and 70s, it was people from the oppressed masses that came up against the system. It was people like the Panthers, but not only was people like even in that time, the Panthers, if you look at the Rainbow Coalition, they united not with like middle class whites, but with the poorest of whites. And here's a book that I highly recommend called Revolutionary Hillbilly by Hy Thurman, who was the leader of the Young Patriots. And when they were organizing the poorest of the poor in the 70s, while a large portion of the U.S. was bought out. There was the crashes in the 70s. But I think a lot of the reason why the communists were less successful after the revisionism, they abandoned proletarian organizing in the South. They focused on the Midwest and more white areas of the country. They backed civil. If you look at Henry Winston, he had horrible things to say about all of the great Black Power figures like Kwame Ture, Robert F. Williams that I talked about earlier. He had horrible things to say about them, and they were focusing on this like almost like anti-racist but like colorblind kind of fight against classism that didn't really address the real issue of national oppression and how it ties in with class. I think if I had to say that reality, so my family came down from upstate New York when I was about 5 years old, and we were some of the poorest people up there. It's a tourist town, tourist college town, but also hay fields, dairy farms, very, very rural area. When I came down here, this, like I said, this is one of the poor. This is in the South. There's less resources here. There's a high concentration of poor blacks. It's in the Black Belt South. There's a huge influx of Mexican immigrants in particular, as well as other Latin American immigrants. And if you go to the proletarian jobs, the essential jobs, I'm talking the ones I would say in particular: construction, meat packing, agriculture. If you look at the key jobs and the most exploited and the most essential jobs, you will see predominantly oppressed people in those jobs. And you can't organize on a class only basis unless you go to those most exploited, most essential proletarian jobs. And when you go and you organize those people, part of what's holding them back is the criminalization, the immigrant lawfare system against predominantly indigenous people. Like if you're going to do the organizing and do the, not just get up on YouTube and get followers and say you know about Hegel. I'm talking about you want to get down and dirty and organize actual workers. The primary workers that you need to organize first to rise all of us are facing national oppression. And that's why the Harry Haywood Communist Party, rightfully so, put anti-lynching at the front of the agenda for the entire struggle for the proletariat. That's why they put labor integration there. And the Black Belt's not the only oppressed nation. I can go ahead and briefly on the history of the Black Belt is the soil here was a certain consistency that led for, you know, these large cotton plantations. And there's a belt that goes from Virginia all the way down past Georgia and Mississippi. And at one point, 60 to 70% of the population or more was black in those areas. Because of mass migration north into segregated ghettos up north, that population has dwindled. But it's went down to maybe 20, 30% black. But in the Black Belt South, to this day, if you go to the most exploited, most essential industry and production, you will see black workers. And it has been black workers in the United States that have led the majority of the labor struggles in the United States. It has been masses of black workers who have been on the front lines of the labor struggles. If you look at the Amazon workers today, if you look at the auto workers, if you look at meat packing, that has been it. So what I'm saying is this revisionist line of not putting national oppression first and not fighting against national oppression does not adequately address class in the United States. And I think that's why it doesn't work. So if you look at the black belt, and then there was a mass migration, and so you still have the super exploited black belt. And then if you look, the majority of black people still live in segregated ghettos who have separate, mostly black Democrat politicians that have specific policies that affect those segregated neighborhoods and education. So it's not just land. You look at the formation of neocolonial internal governments, just because they've been able to keep outright segregation off the books. National oppression has not gone away. These problems have only intensified. And the other oppressed nation that's not talked about, obviously there's the indigenous oppressed nations who have similar neo-colonial governments. If you look at like the rich casinos, where like there's like a rich family that owns the casino and the rest of the indigenous people live in absolute poverty. Even though they've been given their own land, the United States, through manipulation within these oppressed nations, has essentially formed internal neo-colonial governments on reservations, which to this day are indigenous people are the most impoverished population in the United States. They're still dying massive alcohol.
Let's say Carlos Garrido, or any of or Haas, let's assume they're listening to everything you say. Where do you think they would disagree with you? Because I'm not sure.
Carlos Garrido in particular, he says that Martin Luther King led the revolution, which was the civil rights revolution, and Nick and Noah says that national oppression is not a thing. We don't have to respect self-determination, and we shouldn't put black issues, Chicano issues, indigenous issues at the forefront of the whole. We should be reaching out to workers generally.
Maybe I don't know.
That's the disagreement.
Well, okay, so that you said national sovereignty. What does that mean?
National sovereignty, oppressed people can have their own government and have their own political entity. People who were never fully citizens of the United States have the right to form separate political entities of various levels of autonomy. The same thing that happened in the Soviet Union. The same thing that I believe Stalin correctly did the policy on Ukraine, Belarus, and other countries. I think that strengthened it ultimately because they were able to build up, because they were able to stop nationally oppressing. They were able to transform the Russian Empire into an anti-colonial force. If you look at the Uhuru movement says they have a specific emphasis on colonialism. They call it the colonial mode of production. What they said is that the Soviet revolution, in their eyes, wasn't a socialist revolution. It was an anti-colonial revolution. And I think in some regards, my position with Leninism is that socialism requires anti-colonialism. That you cannot organize a new political entity and maintain national oppression. It is the most effective, efficient, and powerful way to unite all the workers by ending national oppression. That way, the oppressed people will be the ones most at the forefront of your revolution because they face the worst conditions. And if we look in the United States, that has been the aspect. It has the masses of black workers have been the backline of organized labor in this country. They were the forefront of the anti-war movement.
So you agree with, you mentioned the Black Panther specifically, and I've read Huey P. Newton's autobiography. So would you be in agreement with black nationalism, with self-segregation, voluntary segregation, sovereignty of these groups?
that's not that's not what fighting against national oppression is about. That is a later on concept of what region gets what political power, and that's something people lead to an end to create debates. Like the policy of the Black Belt South would be right to return, at the very least, like for Palestinians, return of stolen lands that have been a history against black farmers, and those people will have dominion over the places where they are the majority and have a level of autonomy.
So that's
to an extent.
the
That's
same.
it.
I'm sorry, but that sounds like the same thing. How is that not the same thing?
Because it isn't forced. It's not okay. So the Black Belt South, there's white people living in the Black Belt South. Those people will be citizens, just like in Palestine. Like, let's say we're to end national oppression in Palestine. The people, the Zionists who didn't fled, would be under the majority controlled Arab government. White people in the South, and they're not even they would be under a government that has those people no longer nationally oppressed, which means black people would have the same rights as them.
Okay, and there is a comment here, actually from a Russian, saying it's a potential bloodbath. And she specifically references, Stalin himself did have to do mass deportations. That is a true thing. That was from some of these groups siding with what they saw as, they saw the Germans as actually a way to help their national identity. So they sided with the Germans, and that after the war, there were mass deportations. There was also the 1990s, which he references, when there were more than 40 ethnic conflicts after the fall of the Soviet Union. A lot of them were directed against Russians, Kazakhstan. There were those northern cities, which were actually always Russian cities, but they fell under Kazakhstan. Tajikistan, there was ethnic cleansing. There were actually several.
853-02129. Go ahead. I think I would, in the United States, so first of all, Stalin didn't create those national realities. He responded in a way that best strengthened the Soviet Union, built the Soviet project. It makes sense that after the fall of the Soviet Union, that the West would manipulate those specific issues. And in regard to those specific nations, they're not exactly the same as the United States. So the nations in Eastern Europe that were used, they were pumped up by the West to go against them. And Stalin having that policy that was beneficial then didn't create that problem. Like, that was the best thing to do. There would have been these ethnic conflicts regardless. The West is going to use whatever it can. Specifically in the United States, if we look at the oppressed nations, these are super exploited people who have been on the front lines of the majority of class struggle and the struggle against the empire broadly. And there is a need to focus on those issues, not just for those groups, but for workers as a whole. Just as Marx said that you can't have, labor in white skin free while labor in black skin is oppressed. We cannot improve conditions in the United States as far as labor and maintain national oppression. We cannot continue to have communities over criminalized, over policed, kept super exploited, kept the first one fired, last one hired. You are not going to be able to organize labor in those conditions. That's the issue of solidarity. If an attack on any workers, attack on all workers. So you have to put those issues forefront and center for the benefit of the whole of the proletariat. And that includes the social issues. That includes freedom of cultural expression that was denied. That includes the hidden history of Black Power and Chicano power and Chicano organizing, as well as general proletarian organizing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to understand, your perspective on the two camps and where they disagree and why one camp is better than the other. And I just don't understand really. I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I was trying to ask a question about national oppression, and I'm wondering, you talked about, forming national governments, but then you said that's that kind of discussion is what people do that want to just get into arguments. So I'm not
That's
clear.
a later on thing. For the immediate struggle,
Okay,
for
right
the
now,
immediate,
right now.
yes, my position right to self-determination before, after, and during the revolution. So before the revolution, this would mean that white communists and organizers should respect Black nationalists. They should respect them. They might differ from them, but they should respect them. They should not be forcing Americanism onto them. They should allow them to have their positions and walk side by side with them and support those organizations. That's primarily what it means before. During is similar, and then after is when you get into reparations, national autonomy. That's when that comes into play.
But when you say before, and this is what I'm wondering, where the disagreement is, right? So I didn't really hear anything because everything was subjective. We respect them. Well, respect is subjective. Okay. I respect everyone, so we're good.
No. I don't. If you look at Midwestern Marx and Montanaro, they say Garvey made no contributions, revolutionary contributions. They Winston attacked the Panthers. They don't talk about figures like Robert F. Williams. They don't talk about Kwame Ture, which still has a mass organization in the United States. But they're completely wrote off, not talked to, not listened to. I think these organizations should be respected, listened to, looked at for leadership in the entirety of our class struggle to understand.
Somebody can have a different perspective on
we
Garvey.
Can work along. We can work alongside.
And I mean, for you to police people's opinions about Garvey, that just seems unnecessary. I mean, right?
No, what I said, it goes back to emphasis. Are we trying to get the predominantly white falling labor aristocracy? Are they our primary emphasis? Or is our primary emphasis still the most exploited workers? And our primary emphasis isn't getting people to be, okay, I like socialism now. I understand that I'm going to support this person that calls themselves a communist. What we need to get workers to do is militantly defend and support the organizing of the most exploited workers. So it's a matter of who we're reaching out to and for what purpose.
If someone disagrees with you on what the best strategy is, right, but yet they agree with you on what needs to happen, right, on overthrowing the oligarchy, putting in a government of, for, and by the people, a socialist government, like, how come they can't
I'm glad to work with them on a number of issues. It's when they create division and needlessly write off other people who have been doing the work to self-promote themselves.
So I have 2 points here. I'd say 2 points of pushback, actually. One is that the idea that the West was the colloquial West was, we lost Dust.
I'm still here. I'm still here.
Oh, you're still here.
Okay.
Because, blaming, yes, obviously the CIA, the State Department, NGOs fomented ethnic conflict in the former Soviet Union. That's absolutely true. However, they don't get all of the blame. An outside force cannot compel a person to kill his neighbor. That's a thought that was already there. And to say that there wasn't previous ethnic hatred in these regions is just not a true statement. You can look at the book about the Polish Holocaust, the Golden Harvest. You can look at what Estonians.
The CIA is manipulating existing racial hate.
Yes, that's my point.
And Stalin was correctly addressing existing antagonisms.
Okay, sure. What I'm getting at, though, is you can't create ethnostates without violence. You can try to do it as non-violence.
First of all, I'm not advocating any ethnostate. I'm advocating nation states. And ethnicity and nation are two different things.
Are they?
Being black does not mean you have roots within the black nation in the United States. If you look at the Afro-American people as a historic and a dialectic historical nation of people, they have a common background, common economy, common language. It's not purely race-based.
Okay, but ethnicity isn't purely race-based either.
No, it's ethnicity has to do with cultural language. I'm saying that these are not cultural language states. These are nation states. And it's the totality of culture, economy, language in a specific region that makes nation, not ethnicity by itself.
So I think we've, established, so the primary criticism, Dust, it seems that, any group that does not prioritize organizing the most oppressed communities first is where you're going to need to part company. That seemed like the bottom line. That seemed like your bottom line. That you were so certain that this tactic and strategy is the only successful one.
It's the only one that has worked anywhere.
And so you kind of reject those groups that don't understand this and that don't apply.
And they're not going to make any progress. And it's obvious that a lot of them don't want to. They want views, they want clicks. They don't want to organize. They don't want to build power.
So my question is, what about somebody who finds himself working in an area, in a community where they're surrounded by white workers? Do they have to ignore?
No, they should organize. But that's actually it's kind of hard to find. If you go to any major city, the way the nations have developed in the United States,
right? It's a hypothetical.
Okay, I got.
I'm just wondering.
Yes, you should organize places, the proletariat, wherever they are, and in places like the Midwest, outside or urban areas, there is large portion. But a lot of these regions, if you look at Appalachia in particular, it's an oppressed region for various things, and there's specific things to that region that need to be addressed.
So it's tough. I can understand and appreciate that you have a strong certainty that this is the way to go, this is the best approach, and these people, by failing to follow that approach, are going to fail. But on the other hand, you can look around and you can see that nothing has worked, right?
That's the other problem. these
and
opportunists
so maybe
are
what I might
discounting
do,
defensive
okay,
work. Like
what
you
I
can,
might
like,
do as somebody who's looking around the world or around the nation and seeing the lack of progress, I might not, have such strong
we're
opinions
in the
on what's going to
we're
work.
okay.
I
We're
might, I
in the
might, I might have
imperialist
a little
core.
humility and think that other people, hey, you think that'll work? Hey, go try that. I support you. Good luck. I want the best. Like we
But
all need
that's
to
another
do
that's
the
another
best
thing.
we can.
People have been organizing in the immigrant community. People have been organizing in labor, and these groups that think that they're going to reach out to probably the most reactionary portion of the population as being the most revolutionary. Not only they haven't done anything to speak of, they're attacking work that has defended our class. Like maybe they haven't made gains, but there's people who sacrificed their lives, like in the post office union. There's stuff behind the scenes, majority black post office workers who have fought and sacrificed to defend a little bit of what we still have left.
But I
And
know,
and if we look and if
Midwestern
we look
March
at
supports them,
like
right?
constant, it's constant
Hodge
class struggle.
supports
It's
them. I
constant
know
class
the American
struggle.
Communist
No, they
Party
don't.
supports the.
No,
Of
they
course
don't.
they do.
They write off
absolutely do.
PSL like it's the worst thing that ever happened. They say there is no left in the United. They don't. They completely
No,
write off
like,
as if
it's
there
like
is,
George
and maybe they're
Washington, right?
ignorant. I think they're ignorant. Honestly, remember I talked about how people have been separated. Not only have they been separated from the history of resistance historically, they've been told there is no history of resistance now, and there is. And there is still class struggle going on, and it is in the most oppressed and exploited communities. On the label of labor, the immigrants'
I don't
rights,
think anyone
and
denies that.
etc.
Yes, I don't think
No,
anybody denies that.
you'd be surprised.
Okay, so
it's just such a huge statement to say, because the USA is, maybe it's not one. I mean, it is a nation state. So
it's always been multinational from its conception. It's the populace has always been multinational. Okay. There's been a dominant group and an other, and certain groups have been allowed into that. Like if you look at the Irish and the Italians were originally, the diaspora was originally nationally oppressed before it was allowed into the general white population. And then the general white population, which receives the benefit of not being an oppressed person, other than that, is multinational itself and has this regional differences and other things. So I mean, it is always, and indigenous people have never been allowed to be part of the United States as a nation. Black people have never been part of the United States as a nation. These are internal, exploited, oppressed nations that need self-determination, and we need to actively fight for national liberation as the whole of the proletariat for our joint cause of proletarian revolution.
It's just, I mean, can you really say, can you say with absolute certainty, so make sure I understand this argument. You're saying because the current dominant group is bad, we should give the power to a different group.
No, everyone should have their own national rights and not have another national identity imposed upon them. The general American nationality should not be imposed on oppressed groups that have to self-determination. Means they have the right to reject America and Americanism as their identity. Means you respect the Black nationalists. You respect Chicano nationalists. You see them as leaders in their community, the leaders in the community they are, and the historic nature of their movements, which have also been repressed. Another thing we don't talk about is the Chicano nation, which, if we look at half of Mexico's territory and a third of the United States, was stolen from Mexico. And this people were essentially predominantly indigenous population, that indigenous ancestor that speaks Spanish has been occupied by first the Spanish, then Mexico, and now the United States. So they've had, and then at one time they were California. So they've had 4 different conquering political entities be their government, but it has been the same people with an evolving culture, history, and language. And if we look at the way these states were brought into the United States, they made sure there was Anglo dominance and that the Chicano people were suppressed before these states were allowed into the Union. And then after these states were allowed in the Union, there was things in place like signs like no dogs or Mexicans. There was that systematic racial done against people of indigenous ancestry. To this day, Chicano people are second-class citizens, even though they're American citizens. And the immigrant population that comes in, which is also of indigenous ancestry, because of systemic racism, end up with the same national condition and become part of the Chicano nation. They come in from Mexico, but even Filipinos who spoke Spanish, who have a darker skin color, come into Chicano communities because they're rejected from the broader culture, are put into this culture and kept and exploited. And if you look at throughout the country, then you have Chicanos who've gone to the major cities, and you've had Mexicans who've come to North Carolina and picked the tobacco fields, and you've had their cousins come from California. And these various oppressed communities is connected not only by systemic racism, but also by a common language, overlapping cultures, and the idea of Pan-Americanism, which was Bolivar, that the boundaries imposed on Latin America were colonial boundaries. And the Latin American people, primarily indigenous of mixed ancestry, is mixed. And if you look to this day, that is why I say it's connected. I said, well, United States stole half of Mexico's territory. It says, well, why are you talking about the undocumented immigrant from Honduras? And the thing is, because these people have been maintained as an internal oppressed nation based on both systemic racism as well as speaking Spanish and other cultural identities, have mixed into communities of primary Mexican ancestry who have been here. They've essentially evolved the same national condition as the Chicanos that come in, and they've become an underground workforce. And you can see these people and their communities. I've been part of the immigrant community in North Carolina. I was partly raised by Mexican immigrants from the time I was about 14 to 24. I lived in a neighborhood that was 98% from southern Mexico. And then when I got into communism and I studied the Black Belt, I reached out to leaders in the Chicano movement, Partido Raza Unida, and I studied how to address scientifically and dialectic historical the question of Chicanos. And this is a reality. And when I look at groups that want to organize this community and stick up for this community and put it forefront, these are the people who are the maids in most of the cities. These are the agricultural workers. These are the predominant of the construction workers. And there's mixed communities. Some people have documented status. Some people have undocumented status, but they're part of this communities that have been here for decades in various states and hundreds of years, who have ancestry to this continent. This isn't a cut and dry. They're illegal. They have to go. The CIA, the ruling class is using them to lower wages. This is an issue of national oppression and a broader internal Chicano nation that needs to be addressed, and issues of fighting for immigrants' rights, fighting against discrimination in school, a number of issues need to be put at the forefront of the cause for the entire proletariat in the United States to make gains.
Yeah, I don't know anybody that disagrees with you. I don't think Midwestern Marx does. I mean, well, Ian, what are you thinking? I mean,
it's just a
I think
huge
that's true. I
step
think
to
there are
go. It's just a huge logical step to go from
What?
racism. I mean, I think everybody agrees racism is bad. Every
Yeah.
reasonable person agrees racism is bad. But to say we need to break up the USA into nation
Right.
states.
No,
Well,
first of all, no one is saying that. Respecting
hear-
self-determination does not say
Yeah.
you want you forcing that position.
No, I
Harry
didn't hear
Haywood.
Doug say that. I heard him say a bunch of things that I don't disagree with. I didn't hear him say that, because if he said that, I would have disagreed with him. But
That's their decision to be part
I'm not
or not
sure what
of the new political project.
It's confusing what this means in practical terms. I mean, actually, that's one of the comments says it's superfluous. I don't see any.
What I'm saying is we should not be downplaying anti-immigrant bigotry. We should be militantly fending all workers, regardless of documented status. Can we have a
disagreement over the extent to which anti-immigrant bigotry? We can't disagree on the extent to which anti-immigrant bigotry is a problem. We have to.
It can't be said it's not a problem. It can't be said it's not a problem.
Nobody says that.
And you can't if you can't downplay it to the extent where it's not one of the primary problems. National oppression is a primary question of class.
But I mean, these are just so non-concrete things, right? And we're just dividing ourselves.
I can get into concrete specifics and how it does the organizing. Okay, like if I had to.
The language that you use against Midwestern Marx, against ACP, like it's really, really unjustified by everything that you've said today. Like, because I don't know how you justify that language.
Well, I mean, because Jackson Hinkle is out here saying, like, these people are saying horrible, stupid ass things, and they're just being offended.
Let's take Carlos Garrido. So, what horrible thing did he say?
His primary problem I have with Garrido is revisionism. He says that Martin Luther King led a revolution. Racism, national oppression is no longer a condition. We should not focus on police brutality.
Well, what does he mean by national oppression is no longer a condition? I mean, he doesn't mean that racism isn't a problem. He knows that. No. He's Cuban. He knows racism exists. So again, I think you're misunderstanding, and you're it seems like you're being unnecessarily divisive, right? You're using language against these people.
I didn't create this division. I didn't create these conditions.
All right.
I'm looking at the conditions as they are and looking at the best way forward. And if you look at my experience as one of the poorest white persons in the United States, if you look at High Thurman, we're pushed into situations where we're the white minority in oppressed spaces. And the only people that have helped us are the Black revolutionaries, are the the people fighting for immigrants.
Oh,
and there's a reason for that. What do you mean that's bullshit?
So last 700,000 mostly white people died in the Civil War. There was the coal mine. I mean, to say white people didn't contribute anything is bullshit, dude. I'm sorry.
Well,
when did I say that? When did I say that? When I said they haven't contributed?
Only the Black nationalists, only the Chicano.
That have been the people in the latest period. I'm talking about specifically the period of the creation of the dominant white labor aristocracy. If you look at after that, what have been leading the struggle for the majority of all oppressed people, that the High Thurman saw in Chicago, were the Panthers. Now, I can also get back into the history of the coal miner revolts in Appalachia. If you look in the period of 1920, there was the Battle of Blair Mountain along with another. Now, a lot of people don't know that in the 1920s, 20% of Appalachian coal miners were Black. And if you look at today, it's only 4%. And I think a reason why they've been able to keep both the South and Appalachia poor is racism. The unions that were allowed to come up were made to exclude the black workers. So that, and a lot of racism within Appalachia by the labor movement itself has to do with the
Carlos
shrinking
Garrido
of black
has
workers.
no interest in unions that exclude black people. Like, nobody is for that, you know? And so the things that you're saying is like, it's common sense. Yeah, we're all against that. And I think that, you know, the disagreements are way more nuanced. It's like we talked about George Washington, you know, this multifaceted, it's very complicated. And somebody can say a good thing about George Washington and someone can say a bad thing about George Washington, and they're both legitimate. And we don't have to say, hey, you said something legitimate about that monster, I hate you. And you don't have to say, you know, hey, George Washington was a hero. How dare you criticize him? You know, so this is just a silliness to me.
No,
and these are small issues.
It's not okay. When you're defending people calling for the removal of women's rights, of women's right to vote, Jackson Hinkle recently went on a program and said we should remove women's right to vote. Like, I have the Twitter, like, when you got people defending that shit, when you got people calling for the deportation of leaders within PSL, Claudia de la Cruz, who has been a militant fighter for the immigrant community. When you're defending this and saying, oh, that's just, maybe I don't agree with them. No, this is them contributing. Like, these aren't just mean things. This is them contributing to the social infrastructure of national oppression. When you have people saying that anti-immigrant bigotry was not a prominent current within MAGA, and that it's not a danger that needs to be opposed, and then you go on to promote figures like, oh, I like Tucker Carlson. Maybe I don't agree with Tucker Carlson on immigration, but I like what he says about this. I think that's really hurting our cause. We need to say Tucker Carlson is a fascist. Tucker Carlson is the most anti-immigrant bigot on corporate media, or was. And that needs to be outwardly and rightly opposed entirely.
Okay, let's talk about
because
those three
that
issues, right?
takes away from our ability to organize workers on the ground.
So let's focus on these three things. So women shouldn't have the right to vote. I don't know what Hinkle was thinking or why he said that. I think he's 23. He might just be 22. And so, yeah, I reject that, and I disagree with that. I don't think we should focus on taking the right of women to vote.
I don't think that's a mainstream opinion.
I don't think that's a serious platform that they have.
He continues to say these things because he's a right-wing troll.
Okay.
He wants to get it. He's doing what Trump does. He's doing what Trump does, creating division, profiting off that division, and then that's
so
it.
You also mentioned that they don't think that racism or anti-immigrant, bigotry is representative within the MAGA movement, right? And I would definitely agree that anti-immigrant bigotry is represented within the MAGA movement. Like, there's no doubt that anti-immigrant bigotry is one of the things that makes Trump very popular, right? Amongst certain his base, and so I would disagree. If somebody thinks that that's not a thing, I would disagree with them. How we deal with that issue is I think I'm going to have much more agreement with ACP on how we deal with that issue, and I don't necessarily agree that they don't think it's an issue, right? But again, I think it's a nuanced, multifaceted topic that's very complex, and there's all kinds of angles. And just like with George Washington, you can say he was a hero, and you can also say he was a villain. I mean, so again, I think we just need to not.
I don't think we should do either.
Huh?
He was both a hero and a villain simultaneously. And we can understand on a historical dialectical method how he was a hero and how he was a villain.
But we can understand how the issue of immigration is multifaceted and how it's complex and how
it's lawfare. It's lawfare against an oppressed people, cut and dry, just like criminalization. Like the only people who are caught, kept undocumented, are primarily people of indigenous ancestry to the Americas and other oppressed groups and nations with diasporas.
In your effort to
white groups are let in, right wingers are brought in.
You've already demonstrated how complicated it is. You see what I'm saying? You're trying to tell me that it's not complicated, and then you just said 4 very complicated sentences that prove how complicated the issue is.
I don't think it's similar to discrimination in policing. Like immigration is used as lawfare to maintain national oppression. Same thing with criminalization of black and brown people is used to maintain national oppression. Immigration law has nothing to do with preventing immigration. It has little to do with protecting the borders. It has everything to do with maintaining
self-determination.
Maintaining an internal, super exploited labor, both internal and external, on the continent. It's similar. It's no different from the slave patrols returning. The migra is no different from the slave patrols returning black workers from better conditions to worse conditions in the South.
So I think it is more complicated because we got the brain drain, right? We've got professionals coming from the Philippines.
Brain drain benefits us. Why would we be against brain drain?
Again,
like it's not good for those countries.
Yeah,
but that's not an issue we need to organize workers around here around.
I'm not making a for or against argument. I'm just talking about the complicatedness of the issue, and you're trying to simplify it. I think you're oversimplifying it. You're not.
When it comes to what's needed as far as organizing.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I have.
I'm not sure where we're going. Well, I think we're going over there. Yeah. I'll just wait in line here and eventually move up.
So,
okay, here's the thing. So, self-determination. Do Anglo-Americans not have the right to self-determination?
That's an interesting one. And in a lot of ways, Americanism has also been pushed on white workers. If you look at the way the various ethnicities within the United States were forced into the melting pot, and then after the fucking melting pot, we've lost our regional fucking cultural autonomy. We used to have a different type of music, a different type of food. Like, it's not only this corporate imperialist super monopolism, neoliberalism. This isn't a zero-sum game. Just because white people do not face national oppression, where an entire body of them are more likely to be killed by the police, are discriminated against in employment practices based on their national origin and race. We don't face that. But we face class oppression, and we face other types of oppression within. So it's like class oppression, the oppression, the cultural suppression of proletarian culture, and regional cultures for this corporate monopoly entity. They face that. Oppressed people face that. Plus this. It's not like if I say black people are oppressed, white people are their oppressor, and therefore it's the bad group and the good group. No, there's an interlacing between class and national oppression, and it's the monopoly capitalists that benefit and maintain both of those types of oppression. Even though the masses of white workers, to their own detriment, at times have been used in mass to maintain national oppression and have been complicit in that. And as a whole, the whole of white people, if you look at these two groups as, oh, here's one group and another group. If you look at white people as a whole, they are an oppressor group to the oppressed people, but it's the rich who have primarily benefited, not the poor whites. So poor whites need to wake up and say, this struggle against national oppression is also my fight because it's against the common enemy. And these people, because they face worse conditions, have been fighting in the struggle longer and have more experience with this struggle and have been on the forefront of the class struggle for our entire class. If you look at the masses of black workers, black radicals, Chicano workers, Chicano union, they have been, at least since the build of the predominantly white labor aristocracy, that has been who's been leading our movements. And I talk on the Chicano. If you look at the anti-war movement, a lot of people don't know about the Chicano moratorium in 1979.
Okay, well, that's Chicano. You still haven't answered the question. Do Anglo-Americans have the right, as a group, to self-determination?
I don't see. Well, it's their regional autonomy and class autonomy has been infringed. But yes, certainly everyone has equal rights to self-determination. Now, because the United States is a multinational entity, and the white people are not an oppressed nation. They do not have the right to single themselves out as white people and present white culture, because that white culture and white nationalism is only created and only exist and can only exist through oppressing others. Now, there is regional cultures that white people can express free, like country music, which is that is predominantly white people doing it, but there's specific variants in the South, there's specific variants in the North. There's various majority white cultures, language, and expressions throughout the United States, but there is no white nation there, and we should not allow a white nation. Majority of nations are multinational, multicultural. It has only been through systemic racism and systemic oppression of oppressed people that they are their own nations. No such thing exists for white people and should not be allowed to exist. They're two different things entirely.
Yeah, I mean, it's all pretty confusing to me.
It's racism. I think she's right. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I mean, so on one hand, you say black nationalists should have the right to self-government. White people, you can listen to your own music.
They're not a nation.
What you said.
They're not a nation. White people are not a nation. They're a privileged group. They don't have a common language. They don't have a common economy. They're not a national formation. But that language is ubiquitous to the whole. Like, I would say that oppressed people have the right to join the whole, the multinational whole. White people do not have the right to exclude oppressed people from their culture and community, because they have not been faced and been suppressed nationally. They don't have that right.
Well, I think you will be a suppressed national in the near future. I'm freaking look. All right.
It's also, here's what I'll say. I mean, I'm just not that familiar with Dust's
I need to let my dog out.
Strategy and his perspective, and I'm trying to make sense of it. And I'm just really ignorant, which is probably making it pretty boring for most viewers. But I will agree with Dust that I think I would agree with the sentiment that a lot of people push back on, that white people can't be racist if we understand racism to be the total economic and societal suppression of a particular group, right? or black people can't be racist to white people. So we can discriminate and we can show bigotry, but we can't inflict racism. They can't inflict racism on us because they don't have the political or economic power.
Now you're now you're just misinterpreting a certain scholar who said that we shouldn't equate racism with the racial discrimination that white people sometimes face. Because racism is so charged and because it maintains institutional oppression, you should not equate, let's say you have an individual person, regardless if they're black or white, who does not like white people and their position of power, and they exclude someone for being white. Okay, that is an insulated, isolated incident.
Everybody
it is not an entire white people are not oppressed because they're as a whole, as an entire body. They're not oppressed because they're white, and that is why that scholar said we need to make a distinction between the discrimination that white people face on a racial basis and oppressed people faced, because they are not the same. And that is the point, and he was correct.
What you're doing is you're defining racism in a specific way. So most people think racism,
and he did that for a reason. He did it because there's been a lot of false equations, like, oh, I went here and they didn't like me because I was white. I experienced racism. Yes, you discriminated racial discrimination, but are you and people like you held in a worse condition because of race? No,
is whiteness
it's not
a
the
net
same.
negative?
It's a lot. It's like the Irish
in society. And I mean, I think it's clear that whiteness is a net positive. Like, I have white privilege, and I think it's totally true. And I think I probably have male white privilege. I've got a lot of privileges, and I think it's legitimate privilege. And I think that it's, give it overall, being black can be a net negative in our society, and it adds extra struggles for for people of color. They have to overcome extra things. I mean, there's always exceptions, right? And I think Kamala Harris might be an exception, but for the most part, it doesn't benefit, generally speaking, black skin isn't a benefit over white skin. And I think the opposite is true. White skin is a benefit over black skin. But again, I focus on, we need to kind of overcome these skin color differences, unite, and then focus on overcoming the class issue, which is taking control of the government in the hands of the working class.
National oppression is part of class. The most exploited, most productive workers face national oppression.
Everything is part of everything. That's a fact.
It's like a main part of it. It is a main part of it. Like, if you draw a map on the United States, draw a map on the United States. And
we need to focus on uniting and overcoming these differences in order to take control of the government and the political system.
But what do we need to unite those people for?
That's where the focus ought to be.
Are we going to have those people fight for just their community? Like, let's get white people involved in the struggle. Okay. Now, do we want them to be focused on just issues that affect their specific community as white people, or do we want them to address the issues of our entire class, which includes oppressed people?
We want them to have the
same
perspective. We want them to have the same perspective, the same understanding that we need to get past these superficial divisions between skin color.
We need them to engage in actively fighting against national oppression. Like, it is within our class interest. We need the masses of our entire class to fight against national oppression.
Well, if you're uniting with people despite their skin color, aren't they doing that? Because that's what I'm advocating for. Uniting with people regardless of their skin color and overcoming the oligarchy, overcoming the capitalist class control of the political system. So this is
which
what
includes national oppression. That's a primary
how are we losing it
condition.
If we're saying we overcome these racial divisions and cultural divisions to form a united political group?
It's a system. It's not just racial division. It is a political economic system of national oppression, with its
Well, that's the
specific
status
political
quo.
characteristics.
And what I'm saying is we need to unite across cultural and racial lines to improve
to overcome
that status quo.
both national oppression and class oppression.
Well, I guess that's what I
You
mean
need
when I
to have
say
both.
unite.
Well,
Despite your culture or your religion or your skin color, we unite. So yeah, that implies overcoming the.
I think that's the main difference. I think that's the
Okay.
main difference. Are we going to organize people? Like, I don't think we should organize anybody without fighting for our entire class. We need universal solidarity where if one person in our class is attacked for any reason, that's an attack on the rest of us. Like, we cannot allow, like we can organize racist, sexist people into a union. That's fine. If you can get them into a union fighting against the boss, good. But if you're going to have a political party that's preaching communism, that's preaching something for our entire class, you need to include the issues of all people and not allow racism, sexism within that vanguard level of an organization.
So
There's a difference between mass and vanguard levels of organization and how that reflects on our entire class. Here, I gotta go.
You can still hear me, right?
Go to the next page. Okay, never mind. I'm good. I can stay for a little more.
So, but when I say, we need to unite despite, sex differences, racial differences, cultural differences, religious differences, and you hear that I want to attack people because of those differences, it's like we're speaking two different languages, and I just get really confused.
I'm saying, if you're gonna form a vanguard level communist organization, you should not permit sexism, racism, or an incorrect emphasis within those levels, because it will result in stuff that's not beneficial to our class. It's not going to help us.
I'm okay giving you the last word on that, because we're 2 hours and 12. I think this is our longest show.
It might be.
I appreciate your time, Dust.
I'd like to end it. I think my priority is we need to focus on organizing, focus on building working class power, and focus on the most exploited communities within this country and where we live. I think and we need to not overemphasize pageantry like the DNC, YouTube celebrities, people flying around and making idiots of themselves. I think that's the secondary. Don't get caught up in that. Find out who is making things better for your community, in your community, who's leading struggles and join and support those efforts. I think that's the primary. And whenever you hear someone attacking people that are doing those things, I don't know why they're doing it. Like, I don't want to see that anymore. Like that's what I think it do. And it's really bad when I'm already fighting against, I have to deal with people who join the Democrats and they support Democrats or they support Republicans. They're basically supporting our enemy. And then on top of that, now we have arrogant so-called socialist organizations that simply attack people who are doing the work and don't engage in the work. And my advice would be, find the people doing the work, join and support that work. And that's what I have done. And where it led me, I was involved in Occupy. I was involved in civil rights struggles. I was involved in the immigrants' rights struggle. I pushed for a Trayvon Martin event. I supported Black Lives Matters and the revolts around police brutality, and tried to make links between labor and community organizing. And I think if you're serious about doing that, that's where you'll end up. I hope more people get to that conclusion and they don't waste their time with these primarily online Twitter disputes, fancy hotel conferences, and the like.
Okay.
I'll give my closing statement.
Yeah.
So I'll say it's an American-centric debate. Most other countries don't have this view of borders being racist. Actually, it's funny, on Facebook yesterday, and I'll just share this little anecdote about that, because there was this right-wing American guy I know on Facebook who yesterday shared this post on Facebook with a picture. It was literally a picture of Noah's Ark with the Russian colors on it. He was saying, well, if the American economy collapses, it's okay. We can all go to Russia. It's just as, it's just white people's, literally what he said, there's white people's Noah's Ark. Because, he's a very right-wing guy, right? He's definitely not a left-wing guy. And I commented, it's like, Russia's fine with smaller numbers of Americans and French and whoever coming there now. They think we're cute. It's like, oh, this is American guy. It's funny how he tries to speak Russian. That's cute. There's only a few of us. But they're not going to, it's not, I told him this is my exact wording. It's not the USA. Russia's not going to take mass migration. If there's they'll take thousands of us, but they won't take millions of us. And just because you're white, like you're a white nationalist guy, they don't care. You're not, you're just as foreign as a dude from Africa or a dude from China or a dude from Central Asia. Actually, the Central Asian guy is one up on you because he's a former Soviet bloc person. So that's my closing thought. When it comes to, it's a very American-centric viewpoint, the war on borders. That's all I have to say on that. That's my soapbox for you.
Okay. 2 hours, 15 minutes. That was a long time. It's tough. It's a struggle for me. And part of it is just like, I think I just come at it from a totally different direction than Dust. And after each thing he says, I'm just wondering, like, you're saying this, and to me, I'm trying to figure out, so what does that have to do with you hating on the ACP and Midwestern marks? I see the big disconnect. I'm trying to figure out the negativity that he has, and I'm still confused by it. But part of it is probably my own ignorance about things.
It's not your own ignorance. You're beating yourself up. I think it's completely unfair to label someone a fascist for an opinion that, 99% of humans have.
When did I label someone a fascist?
Well, Tucker Carlson's
I can say chauvinist. Yes, Tucker Carlson is a fascist because immigration is used to maintain race-based national oppression in the United States. And he is one of the ones promoting that socially on a huge capitalist platform. That makes him a fascist. That is not the case in Russia or China or anywhere else. And their right to immigration policy. They're not the same. There's a complete false equivalency.
It's not the same. So, okay. I don't think we're going to agree on that, but we'll disagree to disagree. Agree to disagree.
It's tough. So, but yeah, I would like to figure out how to have a more pointed discussion at the actual issues, and it seems like, because most of the discussion I'm listening to what Dustin's saying, and I like it. It makes sense for the most part, but it doesn't explain,
I would suggest, I think a lot of what we do on this show is we talk about general geopolitics. And it's basically, okay, the rising multipolarity, Russia is an ally, China has been raising up, offering win-win trade, but also I would say it's still the proletariat leading. It's the Palestinian resistance. It's the Houthis, who are really leading the global struggle and allowing these, this advancement. But I would say if we want to plug into that and we want to contribute to that, we're going to have to build workers' power in the United States. Like, there is no supporting Russia or supporting China without actually having political power within the United States to do that. I think to do that, we're going to have to look at people organizing. And it would be good to see, more of an emphasis on, labor organizing and the fight against national oppression and other stuff like that.
I think there's multiple ways to organize, and I think using social media to share ideas and to proliferate ideas, I think, is an important tool that we just recently have had access to. And they'll probably take it away because it's probably a danger tool. But I don't agree with your take on, organizing is what we have to do. We have to stop doing the YouTube. Like, I mean,
no, I'm not. We can use YouTube to support it. It just has to be primary. I think we should be using our YouTube to support organizing of workers' power here that has the ability to stand in solidarity.
I don't see them as two distinct things. I think the YouTube can be a kind of organizing, and I mean, you can reach
it is, but it's always a support role. It will always be a support role. To the
okay, but some people have to just dedicate themselves to the support role and can't be expected or should.
That's what I do too. That's what I do. But in that support role, we can at least have the correct emphasis on the whole.
By Ian. Okay, so yeah, Ian had to go. Dust. We should maybe we should just have more of these discussions informally where we can go
on
over them.
Boring people.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for having me on, and sorry if I'm not trying to be difficult.
No,
I think we do need a revolutionary edge.
I want to entertain the audience, and I feel bad when I feel like the audience probably doesn't want to listen to us anymore. But
all right, thanks for having me on.
Okay.
And I really appreciate it. And I look forward. I enjoyed this discussion. I look forward to more discussion and continue to support your show.
Thank you, Dust. Thank you, viewers. We will see you guys on Tuesday. See you then.